Ayikoy Nikichu, Nikinamo Tiana Williams Klassen, SC Wishwell, Umecha. Of course, I'm introducing myself as Tiana Williams Klassen, and I come from the village of Wishwell. I am the director of the Yurok Tribe's Wildlife Department, and have been a part of our Condor restoration program since its start all the way back in 2008. I was very honored to be invited by Council Member Provolt to give a presentation to the Orick District meeting, hopefully providing a bit of an update on what's going on with our Condor restoration activities. I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit of a presentation, actually, starting out with a bit of an introduction to the birds and their history, some of the work that we've done so far in order to bring us to this point, and what our next steps are going to be for Condor restoration into Yurok country. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen. Okay, that should be it. So of course, what I'm talking about here is the fact that Kupreganish Kiti Keme, or that California condor, will be returning to Northern California, hopefully sometime very soon. So this is something that the Yurok tribe has been working towards actively, I guess I'll say, since 2008. Really starting much earlier than that, with some of our elders who particularly prioritized condor restoration to our area. But this is something that we've been doing in partnership with Redwood National Park almost since the beginning. 2007, I think we actually talked to them first about it. And it's going to be targeting a release within Yurok ancestral territory, based out of a release and management facility that's actually placed in Redwood National Park within Orick District. Ultimately, what this has been is a joint project between the Yurok Tribe, the National Park Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who have partnered to develop a California condor restoration program within Redwood National Park, within Yurok ancestral territory, that would return condor to a portion of its historical range. They used to live here. We used to have a very strong relationship with them, but they were actually extirpated from our region about 100 years ago. Bringing them back is going to substantively contribute to California condor recovery. And so after 13 years of preparation, including 4 years of environmental assessment, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as the federal agency who's kind of, in charge, so to speak, of endangered species, has issued a final rule in support of establishing what's called a non-essential experimental population, which was actually released concurrent with us releasing a finding of no significant impact, which is kind of the wrap-up of that environmental assessment process saying, hey, yes, we think it's a good idea, let's move forward with condors. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So in case any of you aren't familiar with condors, I think that's unlikely, but just in case, this is a condor. They're actually the largest land-based bird in North America, with a wingspan of as much as 9.5 feet and weighing as much as 25 pounds. We say that their lifespan is unknown because they live so long, we just haven't been studying them long enough to know how long they can live. But we do know that their near cousin, the Andean condor in South America, can live as much as 80 years in ideal situations in captivity. So we expect a long life out of our California condors as well. The ecological role that they fill is basically as a giant obligate scavenger. They're like the turkey vultures that you see around now that kind of fill a similar niche, but much larger, which means that they can actually feed on much larger animals that turkey vultures can, and break them down and reintroduce them to the environment. Say, for example, those large California sea lions that you see on the beaches that just sit there and bloat. Once California condors come back, they'll actually be able to break those open and make them available to the food chain. So California condors, like I said, have been extirpated locally, but they actually used to have a very expansive range in the Pleistocene epoch, which was about 12,000 years ago backwards. They actually ranged all the way across the coast of what's now the United States. By the 1850s, they had shrunk to kind of this gray area that you see here. And by the 1950s, they had shrunk to that kind of a red wishbone shape in Central California. And the last birds were seen in this area in the early part of the 20th century. But it got so bad that there's actually only 22 individuals left in the entire world, making them one of the most highly endangered birds in the entire world. Unfortunately, most of those mortality factors related to human impacts, largely associated with colonizers pushing westward. So on the one hand, there was a major reduction in the large animals that they relied on, the deer and elk and bear and seals and whales that were over harvested by the newcomers. There was direct human take. People would kill condors. People would take eggs for scientific or just because they thought that they were cool reasons. There was habitat loss. The two big ones in our area were the loss of our redwoods, which they nest in and roost in, and the loss of the prairies that we had maintained. Because being a big bird, they are very reliant on prairie systems to find food, or open systems in general. There was indirect poisoning. People would leave out poisoned carcasses for other scavengers, and condors would incidentally be killed. And there's actually the biggest issue today, which is lead toxicosis, and something I'll talk about more in depth a little bit later. And surprisingly, there's actually a continued issue with residual DDT. Of course, we banned the use of DDT as a pesticide all the way back in the 1970s, but it's still a pollutant that is impacting condors, which I'll talk about as well. But in any case, high mortalities in the mid-1980s drove the decision to bring all remaining birds into captivity to start a captive rearing program. That's what you see here. It was actually highly successful, such that as of December in 2020, there was 504 birds, up from 22, about 329 of which were living in the wild. Our interest in condors, I mean, really, I'm sure has been maintained since they disappeared. But kind of our active interest was driven by the Tribal Park Task Force, who in 2003 made the decision that California condor would be most important land-based animal to bring back to Yurok ancestral territory. And a lot of that has to do with our cultural relationship to them. Of course, they're integral to the jump dance and the white deerskin dance, our world renewal ceremonies. That's kind of who we are as tribal people, of course, as world renewal people. Our culture tells us that he gave us the Condor song, which we use in these dances. He provides his feathers and his spirit to the dance. And as I've been taught, he carries our prayers to the heavens when we're asking for the world to be in balance. So obviously not having him here is a major impact to us as Yurok people. But we didn't want to do this without making sure that we didn't have a good home for condors to return to. I mean, they were extirpated at one point. Is it viable for them to return at this point? So some of the questions that we tried to address was, is there available habitat for condors to carry out necessary life history activities? Will marine mammal-derived organochlorine contaminant levels limit recovery in Northern California? And that's referencing DDT. Will lead limit recovery in Northern California? And feeling like it might, because it's the biggest killer of condors in the wild, what are the attitudes of Northern California condor hunters, and will they accept non-lead ammunition as a viable alternative? Then we've also done a lot of work preparing our stakeholder community members, just everybody in this region, for condors to come home. So super briefly, the habitat assessments that we did turned out great because a lot of the features that condors rely on, largely having to do with large prairie systems or heavy winds, they're not going to change that much over time. We did lose our maintained prairies, but we still have some gorgeous ones in like the Bald Hills area and the Neelam Prairie area, as well as other regions in our landscape. The rivers obviously haven't changed so much that there's not wind still carrying birds up to be able to carry birds up the rivers. The coast is a really good resource for winds, the mountain ranges. So they can get around a lot of places and therefore find the resources that they need to meet their habitat needs. So things are looking pretty good there. We also did, I can't remember if it was a 3 or a 4 year study, but looking at DDT, which, like we said, is a marine mammal contaminant. And the reason that DDT is still an issue for condors is because it's actually a lipophilic or fat binding molecule that bioaccumulates in these fat, blubbery, long-lived animals like California sea lions and like the whales. So even though we've stopped using it in the 70s, it's a persistent organic pollutant that just kind of persists in the environment in these animals. The major concern with DDT, of course, is eggshell thinning, and this is a problem for all kinds of bird species. But normally an egg would have what's called the surface crystalline layer, and it's completely absent in this egg that you see from the Big Sur, Central California area, run by the Ventana Wildlife Society. They do have birds actively reproducing there, actively producing eggs, but they also have a DDT issue where about 50% of their eggs are contaminated with DDT and lack this surface crystalline layer, and the eggs just aren't viable. So we wanted to assess if that was going to be an issue up here. And we got really good results. Our big concern was not so much that we were contaminated up here, but that these long-lived migratory animals like the whales, like the California sea lions, would actually go to other more contaminated areas in their migration, pick up DDT, and then come back and die on our shores and provide a DDT contaminant source. And so the bar that you see on the left is actually Southern California, which some of you may be familiar with a Montrose chemical spill. Basically, the Montrose Chemical Company was just dumping DDT into the ocean. California sea lions there are through the roof in terms of DDT. But there's this clear downward trend in DDT levels as you travel north. The blue bar in the center is actually the Central California flock, which, as I said, has about 50% egg mortality due to DDT. And the bar right next to it in the green that I've circled is actually us. So we have levels that are 4 times lower than Central California. And while it's terrible that 50% of their eggs are not making it without intervention, it also kind of means being at 50% that they're almost on the cusp of having positive reproduction without any sort of intervention. They're almost on the cusp of having more eggs that are viable than eggs that are not viable. And that's because DDT is going down in the environment. And so it's just kind of a matter of time. That said, we're 4 times lower. We're hopeful that that means that we won't have any issues at all. The next thing, and the biggest thing for Condor, is actually the risk of lead contamination. Of all known condor deaths in the wild, lead contamination causes 50% of them, and that's largely coming through the use of lead ammunition. So lead ammunition is the most commonly used type of ammunition material, and for what it's intended for, which is, taking down an animal, it's very effective. The issue with it is that it's a soft metal. And when it impacts an animal, it can actually fragment into hundreds of pieces, which is something growing up I wasn't even aware of. I didn't even become aware of it until I started with the Condor program, and now I made the switch to non-lead ammunition. So that said, the issue happens when either an animal is lost, or more commonly, when these lead fragments get into the gut pile, which a hunter will leave behind. Normally, that gut pile would be good food for a scavenger like a condor or a bald or a golden eagle, who are also very susceptible to lead poisoning. But when they've got those lead pellets in it or those lead fragments, it's just a poison bomb. A piece as small as the head of a pin is enough to kill a condor. So the way that we assessed that was actually looking at avian scavenger surrogates. So turkey vultures and common ravens in our area, not having condors here yet to study, because they have a similar diet to California condors. And we found about what we expected. So in this case, we're actually on the far left in the green, and then the red and the blue are in our neighboring area in Mendocino County, where they studied turkey vultures. So in the green, that far left bar, we found that about 1 in 4 of our turkey vultures did have elevated blood lead levels at a level that would be an impact to a condor if it had been a condor that we'd been studying. 1 in 4 is not great. That said, it is actually lower than any place else that turkey vultures have been studied in California, including in the area where condors are currently persisting. So that may mean that we have less of a problem with lead, but that we probably will still have at least some of a problem with lead. So knowing that, even just going in knowing that that was probably going to be the case, we actually started what we call our Hunters as Stewards project, describing this lead fragmentation issue and helping hunters who are interested make a transition to non-lead alternatives. And really, that was just reaching out to that kind of very natural hunter conservationist ethic that wants to maintain a healthy and viable ecosystem. So, and anywhere from 85 to 95% of the hunters that we talked to said, hey, I had no idea this was an issue, and of course, I'll make a switch to non-lead ammunition, which was incredibly encouraging. So we've been doing that project for many years now, this Hunters as Stewards project. It's actually been very recently passed, I think it was fully passed in July of 2019, that California banned the use of lead ammunition, which is probably a good step. I mean, lead is just a toxic metal. We want to get it out of our system. The issue that happened with the lead ban is California did not have a lot of conversation with hunters, and so there's actually a lot of pushback on that ban, and it kind of put condors in a bad light as the enemy. because hunters weren't really being told why this was happening. So we continue our Hunters as Stewards work because we really do think that it's an important message to get out there, and we continue to make new partnerships amongst the hunting community. But ultimately, the thing that's going to save condors is getting lead out of the environment. We've also been pursuing a lot of work with other partners and stakeholders. We actually signed an MOU with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, California State Parks, and Ventana Wildlife Society, which manages that Central California flock, all the way back in 2014, kind of pursuing condor reintroduction. And we just continued to grow our partnerships from there until we had an MOU, a memorandum of understanding with 16 partners, other federal partners, other state partners, including California and Oregon Departments of Fish and Wildlife, a lot of nonprofits, industry. Green Diamond is on there, the PG&E and Pacific Power are on there, all coming together to say, hey, yes, we think that condors coming back would be both good for the region and good for the birds. So let's try and make this happen. So that's been awesome. In the meantime, post kind of our habitat assessments and kind of concurrent to while we were building these partnerships, we've been doing a lot of training at the other release sites to make sure that we have good management plans in hand and that we know how to safely handle condors, both for the safety of condors and for our team. There's a lot of permitting that goes along with that. We've been working on a treatment memorandum of understanding so that if we have sick or injured birds, we can get them the treatment that they need. What we're just about ready to get started on is building our actual release and management facility and other condor infrastructure, which will be the final step before condor releases. Through all of this, we're actually in ongoing coordination with the California Condor Recovery Program, which is kind of the broader condor recovery program. And we continue to engage with the community in these sorts of things like the presentation that I'm giving to you. So the Condor Treatment MOU is currently in draft and includes the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Yurok Tribe, Oregon Zoo, Oakland Zoo, Los Angeles Zoo, all of which have kind of been longstanding partners. It also brings in 2 new partners, which is the local Sequoia Park Zoo and Lighthawk. And Lighthawk is actually a company that provides free to us, basically, flights to some of these facilities if a bird is very sick and needs to get somewhere quickly. So the Sequoia Park Zoo is actually a really amazing partnership because they are building a local treatment facility. They don't currently have it in hand, but they've been raising money towards it. And it would look something like this. It's a place to hold condors for triage or for treatment if they're sick or they're injured. It would have at least 2 separate rooms so that if a bird needed to be isolated, it could be. It'd probably be for milder issues, like if they were very sick, if they were very injured, they'd go to one of the other facilities, which are bigger and have more resources. But it's going to be a great stop for immediate treatment and stabilization regardless. So they're a great partner there. The other big thing is building this release and management facility. This is actually the one that's down in Pinnacles National Park, kind of inland in Central California, and it's got 3 components to it. The one, and where the birds would spend the majority of their time while they're in hand, would be the flight pen. It's kind of that big mesh area that you see. Plenty of room to stretch your wings and flap around a bit. There's also an observation structure where, as the name suggests, we can observe the birds without them observing us. So it's got one-way glass. But it's also the place where if we need to lay hands on a bird to check out its health or check out its transmitters or just otherwise, check it out, we can bring them in there in the dark and safe space and handle them in whatever way we need to. It also has what's called the double door trap, which acts something like a funnel. You can either use it, you put a carcass in there basically, and you can use it to either lure a bird into the release and management facility, or when you're ready to let it go, you can select a bird that you want to let go and let it out through that DDT or a double door trap. The approach that we're going to be taking is targeting 6 birds released per year. We'll receive birds at about 2 to 3 years of age, which is still a juvenile bird. They'll come from the captive rearing facilities, so they won't ever have been in the wild. They'll be allowed to acclimatize in the field release and management facility for a few months to really hone in on their brain, hey, this is home now. Releases will occur as pairs or singly, and that relates to the fact that condors are very communal birds. So if you let out 1 or 2 birds, they'll actually queue into the birds that remain in the trap, And again, it just kind of hones into their mind, hey, this is home, this is where my community is. And keeping them close to the release and management facility, particularly in the beginning days, is very important to make sure that we can keep eyes on them and keep them as safe as possible until they get their wings under them, so to speak. We're also hoping to bring in mentors from the zoos, and mentors are birds that, for one reason or another, can't be released. Either they're too old or they're too sick, or they were released and they just never really figured out how to be good condors in the wild, meaning they did things that endangered themselves. But they're still really good because they can help teach these young birds what it means to exist in a hierarchy, what it means to be a condor, what it means to exist in community, and give them some good pointers on that before we release them into the wild. Every bird is going to have a single wing-mounted satellite transmitter with an alphanumeric, so a number and a letter visual tag so we can visually identify them, as well as a single tail-mounted radio transmitter. And so the use of the satellite transmitters will give us data every hour on the hour about what they're up to, and that'll allow us analyses of home ranges, risks they might be encountering, their uses of habitat and other important resources. The radio transmitter allows us to actually pinpoint where they are in the field. You send out a crew with a radio antenna, and they will actually find the bird, lay eyes on it. Say if a bird hasn't moved for 3 days and we're like, hey, that's not right, let's go make sure they're okay. That's where the radio transmitters come out. They also allow us to engage with landowners and managers with key resources. So if we see them going to the same spot over and over, we can go check it out. Say it's a rancher has cattle they're throwing out that might not have made it. Hey, we'll talk to that rancher and make sure that they know about whatever safe land management practices they could be using to support condors. All of the satellite transmitters will have a mortality setting, which prompts investigation if the transmitter does not move for a specified period of time. So we just always know if something's going on with these birds. Meanwhile, we have been conducting trap-ups. They're currently happening about biannually in the fall and the spring. This allows for a physical check for transmitters and tag maintenance. It's allowed all kinds of people, not only ourselves, but like partners from the Redwood National Park Service as well, to go down there and figure out how do you apply these transmitters, how do you capture a bird, and all these sort of things. It's been really great opportunities for us to get very experienced in condor handling. Ultimately, the long-term vision is that the lower human population here, kind of in the more Pacific Northwest area, may reduce human condor conflicts that currently exist in other release sites. For example, they've got a release site in Southern California, in Ventura County. Obviously, there's a lot of people. The more people you have, the more conflict you have. We're hoping that we're kind of going to be the spur to fill out the Pacific Northwest, which is part of their historical range. Ultimately, we're kind of targeting a 20-year management period over the course of which we'll release 120 birds. That doesn't mean after 20 years we're going to stop managing them, but that does kind of mean that's a point where we're going to assess, hey, do we need to continue to add birds in every year, or hey, is the population doing well enough to kind of establish itself? Ultimately, of course, the goal is to have birds without tags. We want them to be wild and free. We want them to be healthy. We want them to be a natural and integrated part of our system. And I really think we're near a place where that can be the reality. For example, this is a snapshot with actually 22 birds in this camera frame. And if you guys remember, at one point there was only 22 birds left in the entire world. Now that the population has reached kind of a stable point, it's really an ideal time to begin to reestablishing them in their historical territories, like Yurok ancestral territory, like the rest of the Pacific Northwest, to really give them the best chance for survival as a population and continuation. I always like to end with a slide. This is a small snapshot of some of the people who have helped us get this far. We literally can't fit everybody onto the screen, but I just want to thank everybody that's on this screen. I want to thank anybody who's watching this. I know there's been a ton of local support. There's been a ton of support from the Yurok tribal membership. There's been a lot of prayers for us. And we're just really looking forward to making this our reality. If anybody has any further interest in our project, we do have a Facebook page. You can go to Facebook and look for the Yurok Condor program. You'll find us. You can also go to the Yurok Tribe's website, which is yuroktribe.org. Go to departments, find wildlife, and we have a specific page for condor reintroduction there. I'm also always available for any questions anybody has. You can reach me. Probably the best bet is email. I have really poor cell phone service where I'm at right now, and I seem to miss a lot of calls. But you can reach me at Tiana, Tiana, at yuroktribe.nsn.us if you have any questions, or just feel free to call the front desk and they can tell you how they can pass you through to my number. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for being interested in the Condor Reintroduction Project. Thank you for the opportunity to share. And like I said, if you have any more questions, just let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.